Hello, and this is Andre May. I have the privilege of bringing you Freemasonry of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. So, what is Freemasonry? There are a lot of different views that a lot of people have on the subject. Some people view it as a charitable organization, others view it as a cult. But honestly, do we really even understand it? I would probably say no. And for the purposes of this particular video, we won't actually be answering that. What we're going to actually look at has to do with the actual meaning of the word Freemasonry. So it's defined as the system and institutions of the Freemasons, but more importantly, the instinctive sympathy or fellow feeling between people with something in common. In other words, it was just a group of people that wanted to get together that were like minded and wanted to share their ideals and thoughts. And it's funny because as I started to really delve into this subject, I found that for a group that is primarily based on people that wanted to actually get together, they had a lot of separations going on. So let's begin with the 18th century. At this point in time, Masons would just gather together with their fellow Masons in smaller lodges, loose gatherings, nothing to really shake any trees or rattle any feathers. And that all changed in 1717. On June 24th of that year, a large gathering of Masons occurred at a restaurant, the Goose and Gridiron. And it was there that they decided that they wanted to get together and actually form something that could be a formidable force of free thinking, thought processing, and the like. It would be something that they could be proud of, and so they decided that it would become the Grand Lodge of London. In fact, they named it Lodge number 1717 after the year. Its first Grand Master was George Payne. He was elected in 1718 to be the first Grand Master, and then again in 1720. He's also famous for being what is referred to as the last commoner to serve. He had no nobility. He didn't have anything of any great rapport that anyone really took a notice to. But yet he felt it was important to share a grandiose air when it came to Freemasonry. In fact, he even laid out some of the rules on how the first lodges were going to govern themselves. This would later be incorporated into all lodge constitutions, or the moderns, we'll get into that, didn't decide to bring it with them. Meet John Theophilus de Sigloris. He was elected Grand Master of the Lodge in 1719, the time that's split between the gentleman we just spoke of. He was a clergyman, a noted scientist, and a nobleman. And he took it upon himself to add even more grandeur to the ideal of a lodge. And what's funny about him is that he was only elected Grand Master once, but he served as the Deputy Grand Master under several other Grand Masters and had a reputation around the lodges of acting as if he were still the Grand Master. He also wrote what would become the Anderson Constitution, which we'll get into more of later. The 18th century also saw a lot of distrust of lodges and gentlemen's clubs intensify. A lot of people shunned the idea of sitting together in secrecy and having this quote unquote brotherhood that only certain people could be a part of. In fact, it got to the point where a lot of Masons were outed in the news. They were looked upon as too high minded for the common folk. In fact, there were groups that started to form that were anti Masons, such as the Gormagans. So, also occurring at this time, when you have a lot of people that are in an organization, you can tend to have a lot of fractures. So, what occurred was Freemasonry started expanding across Europe. Grand lodges started going up all over the place, but they weren't taking as they as it was originally put, the ancient ideals of the Masonic order with them. So you had a lot of what were called old Masons versus the moderns. The old Masons embraced what was formerly called the Anderson Constitution, and then the moderns decided to create their own constitutions for their lodges. The Freemasonry started spreading to Ireland and to Scotland, and that's where you see a lot of the Scottish rites, the York rites, all of these other different types of lodges and crafts that were going on. And it caused a split amongst a lot of lodges and their ideals. Also in the 18th century, we see the Masonic order begin to spread to Germany. Frederick the Great, also known as Frederick II, the King of Prussia, he becomes a Mason while he's still a crowned prince. And he okays the first German Grand Lodge. And this is important because we see a lot of nobility start to make their way into the Masonic order. Because it's starting to become seen as a high society ideal, as opposed to the old Mason ways, which were more about free thought and the common man. So here we are in the 18th century with Freemasonry expanding into North America. And I wanted to take a moment to actually point out this particular gentleman, Henry Price. And the reason I wanted to point him out was to actually point out his obscenely long title, the Provincial Grand Master of New England and dominions and territories thereunto belonging. This is where we are now with Freemasonry. It's more about what your title is, who you are, your line of nobility, than it is about the free thought that it originally was about. Henry Price, though, he is responsible for the first Grand Lodge of North America in Boston. It became known as the St. John's Lodge. And he's also responsible for an expansion of provincial Grand Lodges in North America, in Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, and South Carolina. And now we arrive at the 19th century. Freemasonry has been splintered into different sects, different lodges. They're not following the same constitutions anymore. It's really a shadow of what it once was. But in 1809, the European lodges get together and they attempt to reconcile. It becomes known as the Lodge of Promulgation. 4 years later, it becomes known as the Union of 1813, when it was reformed as the United Grand Lodge of England. They went on for another 3 years trying to reconcile their constitutions. It got kind of heated. People had to resign, people left the lodges. It came down to having to completely rewrite a lot of the things that they were doing, with the decision to go back to the ancient ways. Also happening in the 19th century, we get a resurgence of anti-Mason propaganda. People were concerned because of the secrecy going on in these lodges, especially in North America. So enter Mr. William Morgan, who claimed to have been a leader in a Masonic lodge in Ontario. He comes down to the United States and decides he is disenchanted with Masonry, with Freemasonry. And he decides that he wants to put an end to it. So he's going to write a book. Now, at this point in time, I am keenly aware that there are maybe some of you that are not familiar with the rites and rituals of Freemasonry or of any fraternity or sorority or secret society. But upon becoming a member, you swear an oath to never divulge these secrets. With Freemasonry, and it's well known now, so there's really nothing that's being given away here. There's an oath that's taken that says that upon penalty of death, would you divulge these secrets by none less than having your throat slit and your tongue pulled out of your mouth. At some point, after deciding that he's going to write this book, first, the publisher is burnt down. Next, William Morgan is thrown into jail for being in debt to others. And finally, William Morgan disappears in North America. More specifically, he disappears in Niagara. Now, no one really knows what happened to William Morgan. There are many different ideas and thoughts on what happened, a lot of conspiracy theories. But the fact that he disappeared after saying he was going to reveal the secrets of Freemasonry really helped seal the deal for a lot of these anti-Masons. More anti-Mason literature was published. People were outed once again as being Masons, and we saw a sharp decline in Freemasonry in North America. In fact, it only resurged just before and during the Civil War. And there are many stories of soldiers on either side giving preferential treatment to enemy combatants that flashed Masonic distress signals. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is my report on Freemasonry in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. I want to thank you for your time. I hope that I was able to give you a quick rundown of the Masonic Order and how it operated throughout that time period. Thank you.